Right. So warm greetings to you, colleagues. I welcome you to our lecture session number 3 for the 2024 academic year. So what we began to look at previously from lecture number 2, I was dealing with part 1 of our presentation concerning the first topic or the first learning unit in AUE 3761, as it were. So now part 2, it's really dealing with the regulation of the auditor, and that's what our focus area in this particular discussion would be on. If you looked at part 1, for instance, which was what we actually dealt with already previously, part 1 was mostly on the introductory part of auditing. So we looked at, for instance, the different auditing concepts. So it was primarily just an introduction to what auditing is, what auditing entails. So we looked at the person of who an auditor is. We also looked at the different categories of auditors that exist out there. For instance, we did mention about the internal auditors, how they differ from external auditors, which is our focus area in this module. Right, which is our focus area in this module. We also look at forensic auditors and the likes of government auditors as well. So those are the things that some of the aspects that we addressed in the first and the second lecture that we held. But in tonight's discussion, we'll be taking a different turn, just a progression of what we were already dealing with in any case from part 1. And in this engagement, we'll be looking at the regulation of the auditor, because when it comes to any profession you can think of, be it the medical field, fraternity, there are certain regulatory bodies that regulate how, for instance, medical practitioners, perform certain functionalities as far as their services to the patients is concerned, right? So the same thing is true even when you look at the profession of auditing. There are certain, regulatory bodies and, legal documents that governs how we are supposed to be operating in terms of the services that we would offer to our clients, how we interact with our clients, and also how we perform our duties and responsibilities in the fraternity of auditing. So that's what we'll be dealing with here. So there are 3, rather 2, because the other third part of it really, it's what I'll be dealing, of course, with in part number 3. But for tonight's discussion, I'll try to deal with 2 things in part 2. So there are 2 regulatory documents that you're going to see, which I'll be discussing, and I'll be navigating back and forth from the presentation, and of course also to the actual documentations, legal documents as it were, or legal acts as it were, right? So that at least you gain an in-depth understanding of what is happening. But anyways, the 2 regulatory acts that governs auditors here, which we'll be looking at, it's namely your APA Act. The APA Act. I'm going to explain what the APA Act entails. It's just basically the Audit Profession Act, right? And then there's also the Companies Act of 2008. So that's Companies Act 71 of 2008. So we'll be looking at that. So now when you look at those 2 distinct regulatory documents or regulatory acts, there are certain sections from there that you need to know for the purposes of this module. So it's not entirely all the sections within those legal documents that you need to know, really, or those that will be examinable. It's only specific ones, which I would outline even during the course of this presentation, right? So now, without any further ado, let's get straight into the agenda discussion for today, so we can see what is it that you need to pay attention to in this discussion. So now, part 2, regulation of the auditor. Okay, let's see. So here in the slideshow that you're looking at now, I've outlined what I call the learning objectives for the module, or normally what I call assumed knowledge. So assumed knowledge here refers to the essential details or content which you should be able to have grasped in as far as a particular subject area is concerned, and what you will be expected to do in the context of an exam, what the examiner would ask of you. That's what I call assumed knowledge. So it's not just merely, learning objectives that you can find in your study guides, no, but it's also, I also point out specifics as to what the examiner would actually expect of you, what they'll test you on in particular. So now the first aspect would be for you to be in a position where you are able to identify, discuss, and apply the requirements related to the duties, rights, responsibilities, and the liability of auditors in terms of the Audit Profession Act, which is abbreviated APA. So this is the Audit Profession Act of 2005 and the Audit Profession Amendment Act number 5 of 2021. So there's just an amendment to the Audit Profession Act 26 of 2005. That amendment took place in 2021. So you need to be able to pick up some details from those legal documents. Now, these regulatory acts, you can find them online. You can actually download them, but also some of it, you find it in the Jackson and Stans textbook, which is one of your prescribed textbooks for this module. In fact, it's your prescribed textbook for this particular module. So it's your audit notes, or what they call Jackson and Stans. And I believe the latest edition is the 12th edition. So you need to ensure that you have that. So the current edition that I'm using, which I'll be using to navigate here, it will be the 11th edition, but it's still applicable in any case because the content is still the same, just a few amendments here and there, right? Then secondly, in fact, before I go to the second learning outline or assumed knowledge item, you see where they are saying identify, discuss, and apply. These requirements, of course, related to duties of auditors according to the APA, the rights of auditors according to the APA, and of course the responsibilities and liabilities of auditors. All of these things, they are application based at this level. So whatever they would bring, for instance, in a context of a year test, or perhaps in the context of an exam, it will be application of those principles, application of those concepts. For instance, application about the duties of auditors, application about the rights that auditors are, allowed according to the APA Act 26 of 2005, the responsibilities and the liability that auditors have in as far as their profession is concerned, right? So there are certain things, obviously, that if you as an auditor would be found to have done certain things that are not in line with the APA Act, you'd face certain consequences because of that, and those are the liabilities of auditors, right? So I'm going to talk about that in detail, of course, as we progress. Then now, secondly, you must be in a position where you can identify, discuss, and apply the requirements related to the duties of auditors, rights of auditors, and responsibilities of auditors, as well as the audit committee in terms of the Companies Act 71 of 2008. Very important. This is one of the most important sources that you would have to use, especially for majority of the questions that you're going to come across in this module. You would have to make reference a lot to the Companies Act. Now, there's certain sections, obviously, like I mentioned earlier, from the Companies Act that you would need to be in a position to apply in a context of a year test or in a context of an examination. Then, of course, you should also be able to identify, discuss, and apply ethical principles relating to the relating to the audit profession and the accountancy profession, by referring to the IFAC code of ethics for professional accountants. So there are 5 principles there. ethical conduct, which we as auditors, we are expected to, to oblige with. Most of those I've already, pinpointed some of them in part one, so I'm not going to repeat on this particular aspect. Then, of course, we've got the SICA Code of Professional Conduct for Chartered Accountants, the IRBA, which is the Institute of Registered Board of Accountants, CPC for Registered Auditors, and the IRBA rules for improper conduct, right? So those are some of the other sources of information that you need to use in as far as auditors are concerned, in the context of an exam or in the context of a year test. You should also be in a position to explain the auditing firm's responsibilities for its system of quality control and quality control for audits and review of financial statements. Very, very important. So on overall, as far as part one is concerned, let me just go back, which is regulation of the auditor. These are the important assumed knowledge that you need to be able to understand or to draw from this discussion. So anyways, without any further ado, let's go straight into the first one, which is the APA Act 26 of 2005. So what are those sections of note that are examined in the context of an exam, in the context of a year test? So you've got section 37 and 38, which deals with registration procedures for individuals and firms as registered auditors, right? So that's more purely administrative information. Now, even the rest of the other sections I'm going to talk about here, most of this info, you were actually introduced to it at second year level in AUE 2601. So you might discover that I may not necessarily have to re-repeat most of the things that you've already learned, but what I can do is I can show you sources of reference. And the most important thing, obviously, is to show you the applicability of these principles in a context of an exam. That's what is more important. Then, of course, there's section 41 of the APA Act, which deals with conduct and liability of registered auditors relating to public practice. Very, very, very important. Why am I saying this is very important? Because there is certain behaviors which is allowed of us as registered auditors, and there are certain behaviors which are disallowed, as far as our responsibilities to our audit clients is concerned. So there are certain regulatory principles that define approved conduct and that also define conduct that is not actually allowable of us. And that's section 41 of the APA Act. Then, of course, you've got section 44 dealing with the duties in relation to an audit. What are our duties? What is our responsibilities when we are carrying out an audit? From when we begin with the audit, during the process, when we are now carrying out certain functionalities pertaining to the audit, up until we get to a point where we have to then, of course, give a report on what we've gathered during the process of conducting the audit, right? Then section 45 deals with the duty to report on irregularities. So as far as us, our responsibilities are concerned, we can come across certain irregularities. It could be irregularities being conducted by the management in the organization, but most of it really in this context, it is irregularities that that pertain to us as auditors carrying out certain responsibilities. So there are things that are disallowed of us, and there are certain things that we are allowed to do as registered auditors. So those things that we are not allowed to do, they will be regarded and considered to be irregularities. So what are the ways by which these irregularities can be prevented? These irregularities can be reported. Suppose if there is any form of non-conformity to the act, in this case, that is identified in the case of a scenario in the context of a test or in the context of an exam, how do you deal with that? So if you go through section 45, it gives us such information. So I'll be showing you where you get this information. Say, for instance, when you go through your audit notes, you find most of these sections there as well. But like I said, these acts or sections, you can even also download them online. Just Google APA Act. You can easily get the PDF document for that, right? Then, of course, we've got the limitation of the auditor's liability, limitation of the auditor's liability. Okay, we're gonna talk about that. Then section 52 deals with reportable irregularities and false statements in connection with audits, right? Very, very important. And by the way, most of these, they've been put in place so as to protect the client, not only the client, but the public in particular, because they're the ones who will be interested in this, in the audit report that will be generated, by us as auditors. Why am I saying that it will be the public? The public, I'm referring to the shareholders here, right? The organization. They'll be interested to know how is the organization performing. Okay, so on the basis of the report coming from the auditors, are we in a position to say we continue perhaps investing in this organization, or we withdraw our investment in this organization, seeing maybe that the organization is no longer performing according to standards, you see? So the report that the auditors will give concerning the financial statements of the organization, it's of utmost importance to us, the public investors, public shareholders to this organization. So obviously, most of this obviously is applicable to, to contexts where we are dealing with public companies, right? Very important. Then, of course, there's the Companies Act. These are the sections which you would need to know concerning the Companies Act. Section 90 deals with the appointment of auditors. How do public companies appoint auditors? In fact, also who is responsible for appointing auditors in the organization? When you go through Section 90 of the Companies Act, we'll be able to get such details regarding to that aspect. Then, of course, Section 91 of the Companies Act deals with the resignation of auditors and vacancies, of auditors. Suppose if somebody decide today, let's say you are an auditor to company A and you are the appointed auditor, maybe you've been auditing that company A for, I don't know, maybe say for 3 years, and for some reason you have decided as an audit firm to withdraw from that organization. What are the resignation procedures that you follow? Because you cannot just wake up overnight and decide to just abandon the audit client without following the standardized approved procedures, as it were. So when you go through Section 91 of the Companies Act, it gives us such clarity as to what needs to be done if you are to resignate as an audit, or if you are to withdraw from being an audit partner of a particular client or organization in question. And then, of course, the vacancy, once it's available, what is the responsible side of the company as far as the vacancy of auditors? Once it becomes available, what should they do? And how many days do they have, to fill up that vacancy? Normally, it's 40 days, you see. You'll see it when you go to Section 91 of the Companies Act. Section 92 deals with the rotation of auditors. Right? Very important, because you cannot be an auditor for one company for 10 years, right? So there's that rotation of auditors that needs to take place at least once every 5 years. Very important, right? So Section 92 gives us guidelines with regards to that. Now, Section 93 deals with the rights and restricted functions of auditors. So there are certain things that, according to the Companies Act, now Companies Act here, this is law, guys. This is the law. So obviously, there are certain things we are allowed to do according to the law. There are certain things that we're not allowed to do, again, in terms of the law. Now, there's certain things that I jumped from the sections, from APS sections, same thing with the Companies Act, but I'm going to show it to you just as soon as I finish with the sections of the Companies Act. Now, Section 93 deals with the rights and restricted functions of auditors. And then lastly, Section 94 deals with the audit committees, right? What the audit committee's primary role is as far as engaging with registered auditors of an organization is concerned. What part does the audit committee play in connection to us as registered auditors? So there are responsibilities of the audit committee according to Section 94. There's also audit committee responsibilities according to the King 4 report. So it's not just only these acts that I've just outlined to you now on the screen, but there is also the King 4 report that is applicable in this context. But I'll deal with the King 4 maybe separate afterwards, after I'm done with these sections, right? So with the King 4, it will be what I'll be dealing with in part 3. So King 4 report deals on corporate governance in South Africa. Yeah, there's quite a number of details that we'll be dealing with there. So in the context of an exam, what do they test concerning these sections? What is it that that they would really be asking you for? So that's what I call assumed knowledge, right? So first of all, they will definitely expect you to explain the audit firm. So I've already broken down the overall assumed knowledge or learning objectives, which I gave you earlier on. So I've broken them to more meaningful items here, as it were. So, and also making them to be more relative to, to those two legal documents, right? So number one, you are definitely expected to explain the auditing firm's responsibilities for its system of quality control. I think I've already explained this to you. Okay, but anyways, of quality control and quality control for audits and review of financial statements, identify, discuss, and apply the requirements as set out in the APA. Okay, identifying reportable irregularities, case study scenarios, then also identifying, discussing, and being able to apply the requirements as set out in the Companies Act. I just want to explain this because at the end of the day, it has to make meaningful sense to you as a student to say, okay, fine, after I've studied all these things, fine, when I go to an exam or when I go to a context of a year test, what am I supposed to do? What am I expecting to be tested on as far as this is concerned? So very simple and pretty plain and straightforward. They will ask you to identify scenarios where there's non-conformancy to these sections in the legal acts, be it the APA Act or be it the Companies Act. They'll ask you to be in a position to identify non-conformance to any of these. After identifying the non-conformancy, you need to be in a position where you explain the non-conformancy that you can pick up in the context of the scenario given in the test or in the context of an exam. They would want you to explain the non-conformancy. For instance, maybe the non-conformancy had something to do with appointment of auditors. Maybe the auditors were not appointed correctly. Maybe there's certain missing documents that were not, that were not documented or that were not signed. So obviously that would mean that the appointment of auditors was now in void. Why am I saying that? Because this is legal documents that are, that we have to bring in context. If there's non-conformity to a legal document, it ultimately makes the procedure that has been followed as far as that is concerned to be nullified and void. So it makes the procedure, the appointment of auditors in this case, to be now in void. But the question is, why am I saying that the appointment of auditors is now in void? So that information is what you'll be given in the scenario. Maybe it could be because there were missing documents that were not actually considered, or maybe there were certain documents that just were not signed, or just the procedure themselves, they were not aligning to the requirements of the Companies Act according to Section 90. Now, the issue is, do I need to know the section numbers? Because already, as you can see, I've outlined that you need to know sections. I mean, there are certain sections, rather, that you need to know from the Companies Act, and the same thing is true from the APA Act. So the question comes now, do I need to know and quote these section numbers in the context of a test or an exam? The answer is no. You don't have to quote any of those sections. The only thing you need to know is the content of those sections. Why am I saying the content or the assumed knowledge from those sections? Is because what they would ask you is the application of those sections in the context of an exam, not the section number. Not the section number. So like I was saying, for instance, using Section 90 to say, maybe you notice that, okay, there's non-conformity with regards to the appointment of auditors in company ABC, right? Why are you saying that there's non-conformity? Then you bring the explanation. Then you can say now something like, there's non-conformity to the Companies Act with respect to the appointment of auditors since there were certain documents that were not actually considered during the appointment procedure. You understand? Or they did not necessarily publicize the vacancy of auditors prior to the appointment of these auditors, or there was no notice that was given. You would see, of course, when I take you to those sections in detail. Yeah. So then when you are now explaining that, what are you doing? You are applying the context of the sections to the scenario. That's what the examiner would test you on. The same thing is true even when we get to the King 4 report. They will not ask you to quote specific sections from the King 4 report. Of course, there are certain aspects about the King 4 that you will need to know, which I'll discuss in a separate lecture class altogether, and then we'll be concluding on Learning Unit 1 in any case. So when we get to King 4 report, all right, it's made up of different sections and all that, different parts and all that. Now, this particular document, the King 4 report on the corporate governance in South Africa, this is not a legal document. This is just what I would call a standardized approved guideline. Okay? So it's a recommended guideline for companies, in particular, public companies. However, for other companies, say for instance, your private companies and likes, they can choose to apply it, or they can do otherwise without it. But for public companies, they are mandated to comply to the King 4 report. So that is the reason why we have to discuss some aspects pertaining to it. So now, one of the core ones, obviously, that you'll be dealing with, it's pertaining to the ethical leadership aspects, which I'll deal with anyway when I get to the King 4 report itself. So I don't want to touch much on that. So let's get started with the sections here, so that at least we can begin to make sense of everything here. So I'm going to take you to the to the audit notes, so that I can begin to explain. About those sections of those acts. So if you go to the audit notes, I'll tell you what chapter. If you go to audit notes, chapter number 3. Right. So I'm going to share the screen real quick so that you can see that presentation. Right. But most of these things, like I said, you were introduced to them at second year, but this is just a refresher course on this. Right. So this is your audit notes. So I wanted to just give you a point of reference of where to find those sections that I was showing you earlier from the slideshow. So if you go to the audit notes, chapter number 3 deals with statutory matters. So when you're saying statutory matters, what are we referring to? We are referring to legal documents in the form of the Companies Act, number 71 of 2008. It's one of them. So there are different sections from the Companies Act that you need to know. And the same thing is true with the Audit Profession Act, number 26 of 2005. Right. There are certain sections from there that you need to know. So like, for instance, if let me see if I can convert the presentation that I was showing you earlier to PDF, then so that you can be able to refer to in fact, I have them here from your tutorial later so that you can see them here. I think it can help. So this is your tutorial letter 102. So this is just where you also get some of the reference concerning some of those sections that I've outlined in the PowerPoint presentation. So just want to use this just to show you those section numbers, and then I'll be navigating to the audit note just so that I can show you where to find the information. Okay, just a moment. So now this is the outline of those sections for the APA Act. So like section 37 and 38 deals with the registration procedures for individuals and firms as registered auditors. So if you go to the audit notes, where do you find that information? So obviously, when you go to this document, right, there are sections where they deal with that. So if I click it here, for instance, it will automatically take me to the section where they are dealing with the Audit Profession Act. So we are supposed to look for section 30, section 38 of the Audit Profession Act. So I'm just going to quickly navigate to go to that. Let me see if it is here. Here it is. So this is section 37. So 38, sorry. I'm looking for 37, right? So this is section 37. So it gives you content of what takes place during the registration of auditors as individual registered auditors. So this is what needs to be done. So for instance, if an individual wants to become a registered auditor, right? One of the things they have to obviously undergo, you need to undergo prescribed education, which is your CTA qualification. And you also need to undergo training and competency requirements. So all of those would incorporate things like your articles, right? You need to have done 3 years of articles. You need to have acquired your CTA, and you need to also have completed your CA qualification for you to be eligible to register as an individual registered auditor, right? So first of all, you need to become a chartered accountant, CASA qualified. From there, that's when you can be allowed to then register with the IRBA as a registered auditor in South Africa. That is the procedure, right? Is it making sense? Hello?
Definitely, the expectation is making sense.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Right. And then, of course, for instance, okay, so some of those notices, for instance, these are just to explain what disqualifies someone from becoming a registered individual auditor, to become a registered auditor, rather, as an individual here in South Africa. So, for instance, if the individual has at any time been removed from an office of trust because of misconduct, so misconduct can get one to not become eligible to hold their position as a registered auditor. That's number one. And also number two, it disqualifies one from being even registered as an auditor, even if it's maybe for the first time. If there was any history of misconduct from your side, that can also, hinder one from becoming a registered auditor in this context, right? But I'm not going to read this entire information, but I'm just trying to show you sources of reference to say, but when you're doing even your personal study, where do you get that information from? Section 38, registrations of firms as registered auditors, right? Now, it's one thing to register as an individual. An individual can actually be eligible to register as a registered auditor. But now when you're talking about registration of firms as registered auditors, now we're looking at a group of registered auditors coming together to formulate an entity of registered auditors that would perform audits on behalf of clients. So there are procedures for that, right? So under normal circumstances, they formulate, audit firm is formulated in form of partners. So there's what we call audit partners, right? But that is basically different auditors with their certain level of experience coming together, and they decide to register an organization or a registered audit firm, which is basically going to be made up of different qualified registered auditors therein. So Section 38 of the Audit Profession Act gives us guidelines of how an audit firm can be enacted. So it can be enacted in form of partnerships where different auditors come together to formulate one thing, or it can be one entity with one registered auditor carrying out certain responsibilities. So that obviously would be in form of a sole proprietorship. But what happens if we want to formulate in form of a company? So obviously, if it is in form of a company, it means we are going to be registering it on the ground that we are complying to the requirements of the Companies Act. All right, so this is video A. We are done with it. We're going to video B shortly, and we'll be proceeding with this discussion. Why I'm saying that is because we are left with 1 minute on the session. So we'll be proceeding, on video B. So just using the same link, we reconnect. All right, perfect.